Hi, this is Nick Halsey. This is about cemeteries from Monroe County that have been moved or damaged. A large number of cemeteries have had their burials dug up and removed to other cemeteries, and just a few have suffered major damage. This part one is about cemeteries that used to be in the city of Rochester. So, why were cemeteries removed? First, for health reasons, especially before bodies were being embalmed. In the past, there was many epidemics for which the cause was not known. Second, the cemetery could have just run out of burial space. And third, the land became more valuable for other purposes, especially as business property or in some cases as land for new homes. So, what are the problems with moving a cemetery? First, the cemetery lines may not be well defined. They may not even know how far the cemetery extends at all. Second, the old wooden caskets deteriorate and they turn to powder over time. And last, some bones just get left behind. This cemetery never really had a name. It's referred to by this name because it was on what is now South Plymouth Avenue. Charles Carroll, William Fitzhugh, and Nathaniel Rochester bought the 100-acre tract that is now the western part of downtown Rochester and then had it surveyed in 1811 to set up lots for sale. They set aside lots 103 and 104 for a cemetery. Each of these lots was 4 by 10 rods for both lots. That's 66 feet by 160 feet, or approximately a quarter of an acre. Those lots were on what was called Sophia Street then and is now South Plymouth Avenue. They transferred those lots to the trustees of Rochester via a deed that is dated June 1st, 1821. The cemetery is noted on this map that shows residences in 1820, except that the map shows that the cemetery is 4 lots wide, and it was actually just the 2 lots that I have colored green. The cemetery was near the center of the village, and that's always a problem. The small village of Rochester was booming, and that land became valuable. So the village trustees sold the Plymouth Avenue Cemetery lots to Roswell Hart on September 18th, 1821 for $500. It appears that the cemetery is gone by 1832, and in 1852, those 2 lots are the home of Mortimer Reynolds. Now, where that cemetery was located is just in the center of this parking lot on South Plymouth Avenue. You'd think we'd be done with this cemetery, but some of the burials will show up again later. West Cemetery was also called Western Cemetery and the Buffalo Street Cemetery. The former Buffalo Street is now West Main Street. The village of Rochester purchased the 3.5 acres for this cemetery on September 18, 1821. This was from Roswell Hart for $500. So what really happened was that they exchanged the Plymouth Avenue Cemetery for the West Cemetery lot. This map is from 1852 and it shows there are 579 lots in the cemetery. The map came from the Monroe County Clerk's office and it has the names of lot owners on that map, but I can't read those names anymore. Luckily, somebody was able to read those names many years ago. Those are on my webpage, which also has the known burials from this cemetery. By the 1830s, 570 out of the 579 lots were sold. Rochester, now a city, needed a new cemetery. In 1837, they bought what would become Mount Hope Cemetery. In 1859, the city wanted to use the West Cemetery lot for the new city hospital. If relatives were still available, they could move their family members to a family lot. Those that were unclaimed were moved to this lot in Mount Hope Cemetery, and a city hospital was built on the site. During the building of a hospital addition in March of 1906, workmen discovered two large boxes buried in the eastern lawn. One box contained 37 skeletons, all neatly arranged in rows, and the other contained 71 skeletons. It was determined that these were the people originally from the cemetery that was on Plymouth Avenue. These were reinterred in Mount Hope Cemetery. In October 1929, workmen digging on the hospital site dug up part of a skull. There is now an apartment complex on the former West Cemetery site lot. Moving over to the east side of the river was the Stone Cemetery. Very little is known about this cemetery. From all indications, it was very small. It was located near the corner of Gibb Street and East Avenues. Burials are said to be removed to the East Cemetery. The RG&E building is now on that site. The East Cemetery was also called the Monroe Street Cemetery. It was purchased by the village of Rochester on June 10, 1827 from Chesper Bixby for $100. It was on 2 acres on the south side of what is now Monroe Avenue. It appears it had been used as a cemetery for a few years before being purchased by the village of Rochester. This map of Rochester from 1863 shows where the East Cemetery was located. In 1872, the city of Rochester wanted to close the cemetery and use the lot for a school. It would eventually become Monroe High School. Some of the burials may have been moved to family plots in Mount Hope at this time. The remaining burials were moved to this lot in Mount Hope, to the west of the burials from the former West Cemetery. I have a web page with known burials from East Cemetery. In July 1926, when digging for an addition to Monroe High School, a steam shovel dug up two skulls and various other bones. This is where East Cemetery used to be located. It's the athletic field of Monroe High School. The school is in the background. Carthage was a settlement that was originally in the town of Irondequoit. It was along St. Paul Boulevard, south of Ridge Road. Eventually, the area was annexed by the city and became part of Rochester. This map from 1875 is shown in green. It is on Rochester maps until 1930. On this map from 1936, it is now houses on the new Tyler Street. I was told that the burials in the cemetery were moved to the Irondequoit Cemetery. Then on December 2, 2021, some remains from this cemetery were found while digging in the front yard of a house. Frankfort was an early settlement that was located around where Kodak office is now. The cemetery was located on the eastern corner of Frank and Smith Streets. It was used by the Society of Friends. The lot size was 200 by 66 feet. It is not known when it was moved, and there is no known burial records. There is a house on that lot now. Hanford Landing Cemetery, also known as King's Landing Cemetery, is the oldest cemetery in Rochester. It was originally in the town of Greece, but was later annexed into the city of Rochester. It is located on the northeast corner of Lake Avenue and Maplewood Drive. In this cemetery are burials of Gideon King, and his son Bildad. According to descendants, Colonel Zadok Granger, who died in 1799, is also buried here in this cemetery, but there isn't a tombstone for him. The cemetery is still there, so why is this cemetery in this presentation? In 1954, the city wanted to extend Maplewood Drive to meet Lake Avenue. They decided that since there wasn't any tombstones in the southern part of the cemetery, that they could make the street over it. I doubt that they ever did an archaeological dig. It's possible that there are some unmarked graves that could be under Maplewood Drive. I have a web page for the cemetery with known burials, and it also has history of the area and the cemetery. This cemetery was somewhere near the corner of Lake Avenue and Driving Park Avenue. There were only 5 known burials, 3 of which were the family of Dr. David McCracken. In 1846, all 3 of the McCrackens were moved to Plot 88M in Mount Hope Cemetery. There isn't any tombstone on that plot. This map has a red rectangle which shows the approximate location of the cemetery, which was near the southeast corner of Highland and South Avenues. It was in the present day Highland Park. There are no tombstones in the cemetery. It was used by the poorhouse, penitentiary, and the insane asylum. It was thought that the cemetery was used approximately from 1826 to 1863. On July 25th, 1984, this cemetery was rediscovered while doing excavation in the park. An archaeological dig ended up with 305 skeletons from the area of the park that needed to be contoured. An estimated 500 to 900 bodies are still buried in the park. There is this boulder with a plaque marking the rediscovery of the cemetery. It is within the Remembrance Garden. The 305 remains that were dug up went to the University of Buffalo for 10 years, where they were studied. Eventually, they were buried in Lot Y in Mount Hope Cemetery, where this boulder is located. This cemetery was for a small settlement named Tryon at the southern end of Verandaquate Bay. The settlement started in the late 1790s and didn't last very long. Margaret McNabb, the former Brighton historian, published this map in the booklet Tryon of Brighton. She said that at one time there were some wooden cemetery markers in the cemetery that deteriorated over time. This small cemetery was on the east side of Mount Hope Avenue, across the street from where Mount Hope Cemetery is now. It actually predates Mount Hope. There is this deed from 1824 that says there is already a rail fence around this half-acre cemetery. In 1868, it was decided to close the cemetery. There were about 200 burials at that time. Most were moved to family plots in Mount Hope, but about 35, mostly unidentified people, were moved to a small lot in Mount Hope Cemetery. I have a web page with lots of information on this cemetery. Just to the east of the West Brighton Rural Cemetery was a tiny burying ground for some Quakers. No one has any information about people buried there. Also, there is no information on when it was moved. At one time, there were 5 smaller Roman Catholic cemeteries, which have had their burials removed. This is one cemetery that I've updated many times over the years. The church was founded in 1822, and there was a small burying ground in the rear of the church. In 1827, the church petitioned the village of Rochester to close the cemetery and have a few burials there moved to West Cemetery. At that time, there was a section set aside for Catholics in West Cemetery. Then in 1838, the church purchased 21 acres on the west side of Pinnacle Hill with an entrance on Field Street. In this map from 1921, it shows the western part of the cemetery was in the city and the rest was in the town of Brighton. When Holy Sepulchre was founded in 1872, only lot owners in St. Pat's were allowed to bury their family members in the cemetery. Some families were moving out old burials while new burials were being done there. The last burial in St. Patrick's Cemetery was in 1900. At one time, there was a gravel pit on what is now Farview Hills Road off South Clinton. At one time, they dug so far into the Pinnacle Hill that coffins fell out of the side of the hill. The cemetery got neglected. In 1935, the Rochester Diocese decided to move the burials to Holy Sepulchre. They ended up with 4,769 burials being removed. A small percentage were identified by either their tombstones or brass plates on the coffins. The rest were unidentified. All unclaimed burials were put in small boxes and reburied in Holy Sepulchre around this memorial. Many years ago, I heard the rumor that there were still some tombstones on Pinnacle Hill from St. Patrick's Cemetery. About 20 years ago, I found this tombstone at the base of the northern slope. It's for Eleanor Greeno, and it looks as if the tombstone had been rolled down the hill. Then in 2021, someone wrote me that they had found another tombstone. This one is for Antoinette Huck, and this tombstone is at the base of the southern slope of Pinnacle Hill. The site of the old cemetery on Pinnacle Hill is now used by both hikers and mountain bikers. I have two web pages of known burials from St. Patrick's Cemetery. I got most of the records from the archives of the Rochester Diocese. Still, I only have about a third of the names of the people that were buried in the cemetery. St. Joseph's Church opened a small cemetery in 1840 on Mount Read Boulevard, north of Lyle Avenue and Gates. It's shown here in green. It supposedly filled up within just a few years. In 1843, Bernard Clem gave the church land for a cemetery that was off North Goodman Street near East Main Street. Notice that it's right next to the railroad. That would doom the cemetery when in 1871 the railroad wanted the land for a railroad yard. Then in 1872, all the burials were dug up and moved to Holy Sepulchre, which was just being opened. I have a web page with the names of people that were buried in the cemetery, but it's probably only about 10% of those that were ever buried there. St. Boniface Church started this triangular shaped cemetery in 1866, not far from St. Patrick's Cemetery. After the cemetery was established, the city made Highland Parkway along the western border of the cemetery. The cemetery was used until 1917. All the burials were moved to Holy Sepulchre in 1957. There is this monument to the cemetery in Holy Sepulchre. I have a web page with about 1,000 names of people that were buried there. This small wooded hill is where the cemetery used to be, although a portion has been taken off for an apartment complex and another portion for as a church property. When I visited there in the summer of 2022, up on the top of the hill are these two tombstone bases. There is also this 1 foot inscribed rock. I know for sure it wasn't there 20 years ago when I visited the cemetery. This church actually had two cemeteries. Their first small cemetery was on Scotts Road and Gates. I couldn't find that on any map. It only had about 50 burials that were moved to Holy Sepulchre in 1898. The much larger cemetery was at the present day 732 Maple Street, near Ames. It was about an acre. According to this newspaper article, approximately 1,300 to 1,500 burials were moved to Holy Sepulchre in 1898. The cemetery for this church was at the end of Maple Street in 1872 in the town of Gates. As the city expanded, this area became part of the city. This map is from 1926. It shows the cemetery was about an acre and a half. Most accounts say the cemetery stopped being used in 1913, but I found a burial in the cemetery in 1939, listed in a newspaper that I found on the Fulton History website. By the 1950s, local boys had been throwing tombstones into the street, so it was decided to close the cemetery and move the remaining burials to Holy Sepulchre. About 400 burials had already been moved before this time. I have a report by one of the two men that dug up the graves. The first thing that they did was to take all the tombstones to the city dump. Just over 100 burials were identified from tombstones and coffin plates out of the 1,400 burials. One of the most amazing facts was that they could see the burials remained outside the boundary of the southeast corner of the cemetery and also under the sidewalk. The burials under the sidewalk could be explained by the cemetery originally being at the end of Maple Street. I suspect that the burials on the southeast corner may have been unbaptized infants and adults. There is this monument in Holy Sepulchre to the people that were originally buried in Holy Family Cemetery. This is the end of part one for cemeteries that used to be in the city of Rochester. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something.